Hi, thank you all for coming to our Chicken Soup for the Gardener's Soul book signing. And this is Cindy Buck. She is a co-author of the book, and Cindy actually called me up one day and asked if we would like to do a book signing, and then she would donate proceeds to the Fairfield Art Association of any of the sale of the books. And so I said, sure, that would be fun. And so we're at the library tonight, and you're going to give a little talk about the book and just some stories and different things. So I'm just going to go sit down and listen to you talk, and then afterwards we have refreshments, cookies, coffee, tea. Okay?
Great.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, Diane. I feel a debt of gratitude to the Fairfield Art Association for having the garden tour, because the garden tour really has inspired me. Anybody else feel that way? You walk around and you see what people have done with their homes and their gardens, and you think, wow, I'd like to have that in my backyard. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of link it. Since we don't have an official garden club, maybe we will someday. Maybe we can get that going. So thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here, and isn't it great? We've got some nice weather finally. This was quite a winter, pretty tough winter. I think it might be the first time I can remember not seeing the ground from December until now. Isn't that amazing? It's been ice, solid snow for all that time, so it feels really great. And guess what? It's even daylight savings time coming up on April 1st. Did you know that? It's coming already. Doesn't that seem kind of early? It's April 1st. It's the first Sunday in April, and that is April 1st this year. And I think it's kind of fun that, you know, there's a debate about daylight savings time these days, and whether it's a good idea, whether we should still be doing it. Have you heard about that? Well, I'm not sure exactly. Maybe they feel like, since we aren't really a farming community, or, you know, we aren't mainly in a rural farming environment, that, you know, maybe we don't need to adjust our time to go with this, you know, to have more time to work outside. But I think it's really fun that there was a letter to the editor on this issue in a newspaper in South Carolina. The woman wrote in and she said, I definitely am in favor of keeping daylight savings time. I've grown a vegetable garden for years, and I find the vegetables really do better with that extra hour of sunlight. Hello, that's kind of gardening, I might think. I don't know, I don't think that's the way it works. So tonight, I'm going to tell some stories. I'm going to answer any questions you might have about chicken soup and how we put the books together, Ginger. And then answer any questions you might have, or whatever, tell any stories. And if you've got any stories you'd like to share, that would really be fun too. If you think of a story when I tell a story, by all means share it with the group, because it's amazing. Everybody's got all kinds of great family stories and gardening stories and to share. So I want to start with a story, kind of fun. It's called The Next Best Thing. It's by a woman named Ann Peele Thompson. And as you know, all the stories in the book are true, which makes it really especially neat. In this story, she says, my parents, when they got into their mid-70s, they started having trouble doing some of the things they had always done with ease. And they adopted as their motto a saying by Chuck Yeager, you know, the test pilot. It goes, do what you can for as long as you can, and when you can't, do the next best thing. She says, my father was particularly troubled by a weakened muscular system, such that sometimes his legs would just give way. He'd lose control of his legs and he'd fall. And so she says, my mother became very concerned for him and very vigilant. She'd watch out for him, make sure he was okay. And she got into the habit of just checking in on him whenever she'd see him out in the yard, puttering around, doing yard work. She'd just keep an eye on him. So one day she looks out the kitchen window, and there's her husband, flat on his stomach in the middle of the garden. She goes running out, George, are you all right? And as she gets closer to him, she sees that he's got his trowel in his hand and he's weeding. And she says, George, what are you doing? And he looks up at her and he says, the next best thing. So if actually being outside gardening and just enjoying the balmy spring breezes and the return of wonderful warm weather. If that were the best thing, then being here tonight dreaming about it. That's the next best thing. Thinking about the joys of gardening and really the heart and the humor of gardening. You know, Chicken Soup for the Soul books, they aren't how-to, they're entirely for the heart and the emotions and the joy and the love of the whatever the topic is. And Chicken Soup for the Gardener's Soul, can you believe it? Guess which number it is in the series. Is it the 12th? No.
More than that?
Is it what? First? No, it's not. The first was the original Chicken Soup for the Soul. 20th? No, it's not the 20th. You know, we've had Mother's Soul, we've had, Women's Soul, we've had Pet Lover's Soul. Carol Kline is here. We've had Pet Lover's Soul, Cat and Dog Lover's Soul. Many, many, many more than I would have thought. Well, this is the 38th book in the series. Even Eleanor Hall is surprised, and she's worked on about, what, 7 of them now? I know, it's astonishing, isn't it? I mean, who would think that, and you know, it took them how many tries? They went, with the very first book, they went to 33 different publishers and got rejected. Here's a lesson in persistence. They got rejected 33 times before they found a publisher for the book. And since then, you know how it's just exploded. Not only are there 38, this is the 38th, and Chicken Soup for the Mother's Soul 2 is already out. That's the 39th. That's the one after us. And that is co-authored by our dear Carol Kline and Marcy Scheimoff. Teamed up for that one. So that one's already out in the bookstores too. So they come out really fast, and sometimes people think, wow, what's with it with all these Chicken Soup books? But the thing is, it's actually a wonderful sign because it just shows how much people like inspiration, uplift, positivity, you know, how much they enjoy something that has a positive, uplifting message, something that's fun. They're kind of light, they're sweet, they're happy, they make you feel good. And that says a good thing about people. I like to think of it as like, you know how plants grow to the light, they lean to the light. And I feel like it's like that with people too. You know, people are just fundamentally good, and they just, by instinct, they lean towards the light. They lean towards what's good. And that's what we're seeing in this wild Chicken Soup for the Soul phenomenon. So I'm really proud and happy to be a part of it. And I guess what I'd like to do next is tell you one of my favorite stories about the fundamental goodness of people, and about one of the strong themes in the book is the generosity that seems to come with gardening, the selflessness that comes and the sharing that comes around gardens. This is one of my very favorite stories. It's called As Thyself, and the form that we have it in is written by Dick DeVos, but it's actually a story that's been reprinted a number of different times in different places. It takes place back in the time of World War II, and it's about 2 farmers. They're rose farmers, and they live right across the street from each other in Richmond, California. And one of the families is from Swiss descent. That's Francis Aebi. And across the street, there's Tamaki Ninomiya of Japanese descent. Their fathers actually came from the other countries and settled in Richmond and started the businesses and actually even built the homes that faced each other and built the greenhouses out in the backyard too. And the 2 boys, Francis and Tamaki, had grown up together as next door, you know, across the street neighbors, and they were dear friends from childhood. And at this point, as World War II is happening, they have grown to be men with families of their own, quite a few children. Tamaki's family, there are 5 children in his family, I think maybe 3 in Francis's family, and they've taken over their father's businesses, and they're enjoying a good success. They're selling the flowers in the markets in San Francisco. And so everything is going well, everything is fine, but then the war is happening, times are tough, and all of a sudden, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor happens. And all of a sudden, times get a lot harder, especially for the families in the country that are of Japanese American descent. And there are terrible stories going on about Japanese Americans' homes being looted, their businesses being destroyed, vandalism, acts of vandalism happening. And there's even talk about maybe Japanese Americans being sent off to internment camps, which is a really scary thought. So Francis goes across the street to Tamaki's house, and he knocks on the door, and he says to Tamaki when he comes out, "I want you to know, rest easy. if anything happens, I'll take care of your property. And he says, you would do the same for us. And so Tamaki, a few days later, comes over to Francis's house, and he's bringing their prized possession. It's a Japanese ornamental doll. It's dressed in this beautiful white and black silk robes, kimono. And it's valuable. It's maybe an heirloom. It's their treasured possession. He wants to give it to Francis as a gift of gratitude. Really starting to cry. And so he wants to give it to Francis, but Francis says no, he won't take it as a gift, but he will watch over it and keep it safe until things get back to normal. And there's more rumors. There are more rumors about these internment camps, more rumors of vandalism. And one day, Tamaki comes over to Francis's house. He gives him his bank book for safekeeping. And sure enough, just a few days later, a black sedan pulls up in front of the Ninomiya's house. 4 men get out, they go into the house, they come out, they have Tamaki with them. Just with the clothes on his back, they take him away. That same day, his wife and their children go to a town elsewhere in California where they think it might be safer. It might be not as restricted an area, and they might be able to stay there and not be sent away to the camps. But it turns out, no, they're taken to the camps too. And the unfortunate, really sad thing is that his wife, Hayani, and the 5 kids go to a different camp than Tamaki, and Hayani is pregnant. So it's a very tough time. And, Hayani has her baby in the camp, and eventually they're reunited in the same camp. So that's better. Time passes, and back in Richmond, Francis is taking care of both businesses. He is working many, many hard, long hours. He's even got his kids working after hours, after school, coming in, on Saturday and helping. And Francis himself is putting in like 16, 17-hour days. It's just exhausting. But he's committed to it, and he keeps going with it. 3 years pass. The war ends. And finally, it's time for them to come home. They board the train, Tamaki and his wife and kids, they board the train for Richmond, and on the train on the way back, Tamaki is wondering. Francis has written to him and said, I've taken care of your property, everything is all right. But he wonders, can it really be true? There have been so many stories of looting and damaging of property and businesses. Finally, they arrive in Richmond, they get off the train, and there's Francis waiting for them on the platform. The 2 men have both become so thin and drawn that they can hardly recognize each other, and it's only been 3 years. So they greet each other kind of awkwardly, they shake hands. They go, Francis drives them to their home, they get out of the car, and there is their home, just as they left it. There is the greenhouse, just as they left it. It's sparkling. It's spotless and clean. Carrie Aebi, Francis's wife, comes running out with the kids. They all embrace. They go into the Ninomiya's house, and there is the clean, sparkling house. There is the ornamental doll in its place of honor. There on the dining room table is the Ninomiya's bank book full of deposit slips from all of the payment for the flowers and vegetables that Francis has sold from the Ninomiya's greenhouse. And they go into the kitchen, and there by the kitchen sink on the counter is a bud vase, and it's got 1 rose in it. And it's just the gift from one man to his neighbor, from a man who learned as a child to love thy neighbor as thyself. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that such a beautiful story? And it really shows the generous spirit. I mean, how many countless stories are there like that of times, whether it's during the war or whatever, when people have just completely given of themselves so selflessly. So that's the kind of story that we really love. Stories about friendship, deep friendship, and also deep bonds of family. Many, many stories in the book are, they're they're about families reuniting, coming back together. Maybe it's a teenager who's estranged from the family who gets drawn back in somehow through gardening or through flowers. We've got a wonderful story about a grown man who finds his birth father. He had been adopted, and he bonds with his birth father in the garden. It's their shared love. So many stories like that. And in fact, you know, when we sent out our submissions or our solicitation for stories, you know how you have to really dig for Chicken Soup for the Soul stories these days, because there have been so many books that all the easy ones that were just sitting out there in the story anthologies, those got plucked a long time ago, including a lot of really great gardening stories. So we have to do a lot of outreach, and we send flyers out to writers' conferences. We put notices out to all the garden clubs. We go online and with chat groups, and we just spread the word. It's really a lot more work doing a Chicken Soup for the Soul book than I ever knew. I've got a whole new respect for all the co-authors and co-editors who have gone before. Oh, and here's Sid, Slagter, and Eileen. Speaking of more co-authors for the book, Sid and Eileen are right now working on Chicken Soup for the Veteran Soul, which is going to be a real tremendous winner. So I'm just talking, you guys, about how much work it is. Would you like to second that emotion?
We meditated, we just ate.
We've slept for years.
Yeah, I know. It's way more work. I always thought, hey, you just collect some stories. You don't even have to write them yourself. What's so hard? Well, there's more to it than meets the eye, but it's really a lot of fun too, and you get to read a lot of great stories. We got over 5,000 stories in. Is that what you were getting to, numbers like that?
4,000.
4,000, yeah, it's amazing. They really come pouring in, and out of that we picked 101 stories, which is no small feat. But the great thing was, it was kind of almost, it was so sweet, it was kind of comical. I think about half the stories we got were actually called Grandma's Garden. They kept coming, and they kept coming. Everybody's got a story about their grandma's garden. It's like so sweet, and each one, and I can't tell you how touching it was, how many stories we got from women who were like, particularly women, some men, but women who were like 87 years old, you know, and they're writing on this yellow tablet to tell us about how their dahlias grew, or, you know, some experience that they had. I just wanted to share how much gardening has meant to me all my life. I mean, you just couldn't even read these things and keep a dry eye. It was really fun. But one of our favorite stories about how gardening can bridge the gap of the generations, it's a great story called Buddies. It's by a woman named Maggie Stuckey, and it's about a grandfather and his little 3-year-old grandson. And she says, boy, they're just natural buddies, a granddad and his 3-year-old little grandson. And on this particular day in May, they were in the garden planting a vegetable garden. And they had a system worked out. They were just a perfect team. The granddad would poke his finger in the hole and make the hole with his finger, and the little boy with his little fingers would pick out the tiny little seeds and put them in, and they'd pat them down. They're having a lot of fun. But time went by, and you know, he was only 3 years old. The little boy got bored, restless, got sort of irritable, and he started taking it out on the seeds. So he says to his granddad, what are these? And his grandpa says, beets. Little boy says, yuck, I hate beets. So he says, granddad says, well, why don't we plant zucchini? Little boy says, ick, I really hate zucchini. So the granddad says, well, what would you like to plant, buddy? So the little boy thinks for a minute, and he thinks, I know, how about donuts? So his granddad catches himself just in time, says, oh, I've got to go in the house to get the donut seeds. So he goes in the house, he comes back out, he's got a handful of Cheerios. So they go over to this special corner of the yard, and they very solemnly plant the Cheerios and pat them, water them, get them all set. Time passes, the beets come up, the zucchini comes up, and the little boy finds that he actually does kind of like these little baby vegetables. They're pretty tasty fresh out of the garden. So he says, he forgets all about them, but then after a while he remembers. He says to his granddad, hey, whatever happened to the donuts? So his granddad thinks for him, he says, well, you know, donuts are funny. Some years you plant them and you get a lot of donuts. Other years, all you get are the holes. That was some quick thinking, wasn't it? So anyway, we love stories like that. Sweet and funny, that was our favorite. I have to tell you that we're kind of unusual with Gardener's Soul. Where is that book? We're kind of unusual because we've got, notice anything unusual about this cover aside from the stunning beauty of the picture? There are rather a lot of names here. There are more co-authors on this book than any other Chicken Soup for the Soul book. There are 7 of us, actually. And the way it happened, the way it happened is that I sent in a proposal, and 2 people from Alaska sent in a proposal, and I actually sent it in with my partner, Pat Stone, and then a woman from California, Cynthia Bryan, sent in a proposal, and believe it or not, they decided to accept all of them. They liked us all for different reasons. Cynthia Bryan has a radio talk show and TV shows, and she does a lot of public speaking and marketing, and so she was great for that. Anyway, we all had something to offer to the pot, and but boy, I'll tell you, the odd thing was we never met until the book was done. We did the entire thing, if you can imagine, over the email, pretty much. A few times phone calls. But it worked out great, because it's amazing how well you can get along when you're about 1,000 miles away from each other. You know how it is when you've got a business partner and you're sitting next to each other all day, and you sort of like tear your hair out and tear their hair out, and it gets really difficult sometimes. Sometimes. Maybe not. But anyway, we had time to cool off when anything, didn't go the way we liked, and we had time to compose a very polite, diplomatic email in response. So we ended up having a lot of fun together, and they're all just wonderfully creative and powerful people. It's just been a wonderful team. But you try to make all those decisions 5 ways, and then 7 ways once Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield get involved in it towards the end. We go through and weed out all the stories, and then they help at the end with the final selections of stories. Well, we turned out to be kind of a strong-willed group among ourselves. We duked it out over these stories. We all had different ideas, different favorites, and we couldn't always all agree on them. But I like the story that Pat tells. Pat's the only man in the group, and he tells the story of how he was kind of concerned when he found out that there were 5 of us who'd be working closely together, only 1 man. He said, I'm going to have to be careful not to be too dominating. So, we have our first 2.5-hour conference call. Pat can't get a word in edgewise. Pat is like, well, wait. And we're just plowing on through. And he says at the end of the night, he says he got off the phone, thought to himself, gee, that's just not going to be a problem, is it? I don't have to worry about that. He's had fun. He's been our mellow guy. He kind of, he keeps things really kind of loose and mellow. I mean, the women, we'd all take things more seriously, I guess, than he does. But what we all agreed on is, what we look for in Chicken Soup stories is a moment that catches you. A moment when you tear up, like when I saw Ruthie back on like the 3rd paragraph of that story. She saw it coming and she teared up. If you have an emotional, a physical reaction, you either laugh out loud or your throat chokes up, or you even just smile, or you get chills, that's a Chicken Soup moment. That's what we call it. We're patenting that or trademarking that phrase. It's a Chicken Soup moment. You just feel it in your bones. You feel how you're moved by the story. And one of the ones that hit me the hardest that way is a story by our dear Fairfield neighbor of many of ours, or friend of many of ours. Do you know Meredith Hodges? Do you know her? Yeah, she's a wonderful person, wonderful writer. She writes the column for the Fairfield Source, which is on food. So you've read, no doubt, her food column in the Source. And when I first had thought about this book, and how I thought about it is another story I'll tell later. It was somebody else's idea originally. But I needed to collect some sample stories to send off to Chicken Soup headquarters for the proposal. And I couldn't advertise because I couldn't use the Chicken Soup name until I had a contract with them. So I had to go around to friends and say, Ruthie, do you have a story that I could use? Carol, do you know of any good gardening stories that I could use? And people came up with them. One of the first people I went to was Meredith, because Meredith had worked on Chicken Soup stories in the past and done a wonderful job. Sure enough, she had a beautiful story. It made me cry, or choke up. And it did it to my husband Rob too. He said, choked up, yeah. And so we knew this was great, and I love it because it's the first story that came in for Chicken Soup for the Gardener's Soul, and it ended up being one of the top-rated stories in the book. And it was a big inspiration to us that, yes, there are great gardening stories out there. I wanted Meredith to be here to tell the story to you all, but she actually is a little under the weather. She's got a migraine. So let's send her our love and best wishes, and I'm going to try to tell the story and see if I can capture its greatness. It's called Pop's Farm. It's about her grandfather, whose name is Pop. She called him Pop. And he was born, boy, he died, I don't know, when was he born? I don't know, long time ago. When he was a young boy, his parents died, or I don't know quite what happened to them, but he was raised by his uncle. And his uncle had a farm, and he loved to farm. He just really, as a young boy and then teenager, young man, he loved farming. He just found it really satisfying to be out there in the elements, enjoying the weather and planting. It made him feel close to God, close to nature. And when he got to be a young man, he wanted to have his own farm, but he couldn't afford it. It was his uncle's farm, which was being passed on to his uncle's sons. And so he didn't have the resources. This is like during the Depression. He couldn't get the money together to have a farm of his own, and so eventually he gave up on his dream. And he went to Chicago, and he got a job with Pullman making railroad cars. He did this partly because he wanted to marry Meredith's grandmother, and she got tired of waiting for the farm to materialize. So they settled down there. He worked for the railroads, and he worked there for 30 years, and then he retired. And when he had some time on his hands, he knew just what he wanted to do. He went out into about 4 or 5 different vacant lots in Chicago, and he started planting. He planted flowers and vegetables. Now, this is during the war years. It's World War II now. There's rationing, and people are hungry. There are a lot of people going without. And people started coming by, and he started giving them vegetables from his garden. And people came, people couldn't speak English, young mothers with children to feed, people of all nationalities, races, backgrounds. They came by and he fed them all, just without a thought. And Meredith, as a little toddler, would go with him because she was now living with her family. And I guess he was probably the babysitter while her parents went off to work or whatever. So the two of them, she has fond memories of being out in those vacant lots with him. So time passed. He did this for a number of years. He fed many, many people. Went on for some number of years, and then Meredith's family moved about 20 miles away to, the outskirts of the city or wherever, whole different area. And after some more time passed, Pop, at the age of 93, passed away. And they knew that he would want a wake. He was an old-fashioned and very religious man. They knew he'd want a wake, but they felt kind of a pinch. They weren't sure that anybody would come. He had outlived all of his friends. There wasn't much other family around, and he hadn't lived in his old neighborhood for 20 years or so. But they held it anyway. So the night of their wake was one that they would never forget. People came, and they kept coming. Over 200 people came. The family didn't know any of them. And every one of them, as they came through the receiving line and shook the family's hands, they said, "I saw his name in the paper, and I just had to come and pay my respects. He fed us during those hard years, and we'll never forget him. Thank you so much." So the family was really touched to see how he had helped so many people, and also to see that the man who had dreamed all of his life of being a farmer had finally realized his dream. Isn't that sweet? It's great. It's just great. I mean, the moving things, just the ordinary people you would never maybe hear about. No, it might not be written up in any newspaper article or whatever. It's just people being good, being generous, sharing, giving from their hearts. So that's one of our favorite stories, and I've got another one I really want to tell. Hi. I don't know, how are you doing? Would you like to ask any questions before we go on? I've been doing all the talking. Do you have any questions on your mind or any stories that have popped up in your heads you'd like to share? Oh, no, nobody remembering the lilac bush? I tried for so long to write a story about the lilac bush in front of the house I grew up with. I grew up in a house that has a lilac bush in front of it that is about 30 feet in diameter. It's a huge oval. It's so huge that it's carpeted with myrtle, but that's what we always called it. I think it's also vinca. And it's so big that there are paths through the vinca or the myrtle and rooms. That's where we played house, my sister and me. We had the little kitchen and the dining room. And anyway, I could never make a chicken soup story out of it because that's all that happened. We played house in it. And so at least I get to share that with you, that it was really wonderful. But no other thoughts? Questions? So another story I particularly love that I think you'll enjoy is the story about, this is about the passion of gardening. This is, you can imagine, you know how passionate gardeners are. Do we have any like hugely avid, like maniac gardeners out there like all day? Well, you'll particularly enjoy this one, and Carol too. I know she's like a serious, she will be again soon here. Well, this is the, you know, and somebody asked me the other day, what did you learn when you were doing this book? And I thought, first thing that came out of my mouth was, it's a lot harder to do this than I would have thought. But another thing I realized is that, kind of life lesson-wise, is that the happiest people, I think, the luckiest people in the world are the people who have a passion for something. I mean, we hear that. It sounds corny. But boy, you read story after story of how deeply satisfying it is to people to be out there mucking around in the dirt, and how they look forward to it all winter long. Ginger, yes, how they look forward to it all winter long. And boy, you know, it's a reason for living. You know, it's like really makes it all worthwhile. And I must say, you know, I loved, it was, I'll tell you the story in a minute about how I got started gardening. But it's come to me late, but reading the stories has really helped. And I'm really looking forward to this summer, having the time to actually get out there now. The story I want, yeah, Sid goes, right. Be out traveling, you know, and we have to promote the book, you know, garden shows and events, and it's been a little wearying, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, this story is a perfect one about the passion of gardening. And it's about a woman, Lucy B. Richardson. She and her husband, they moved to Frankfort, Kentucky. And they're quite well to do. They bought a very nice house in a beautiful downtown area, had a beautiful big backyard, and it was within sight of the state capitol building. So there's a lot of street traffic going by. She's living there for a bit. Her next door neighbor is an elderly woman who loves to garden. She gets her started gardening, and Lucy just really gets the bug, and she is avid. She's out there, she's gardening, and after about 3 years, she's got a fabulous garden. All the tourists coming by, they stop and admire it. They look over the fence, they think it's beautiful. She loves to like surprise people with a bouquet or just, you know, cutting from the garden. And there's street people that come by too, and she likes to, you know, share a flower with them or a word with them. So this one day, you know, as time goes by, she's out there a great deal of the time. She's actually out there from sunup to sundown. She's such a, you know, passionate gardener. She's just living in her backyard. The quote that goes with the story says, I live in my garden. I just sleep in the house. So this one day, street person comes by, one of the usuals, regulars, and he looks over the fence at her and he says, "Excuse me, lady, can I tell you something?" And she says, "Sure," thinking that he's going to give her, you know, the compliment she's used to getting. He leans over, looks at her and says, "Lady, whoever owns this house works you way too hard." That one always reminds me of my dad, who worked as a realtor, dressed up and, you know, all his life, and then when he retired, he started working on his scale railroad in the backyard. He's out there sweating and, you know, laboring and hammering and building the track and all this stuff, and he'd always say, "You couldn't pay me to do this." But, you know, that's passion, that's fun, that's what people love to do. So I want to tell a couple of personal stories about people in town. I wish they could be here. Ron Blair is one of them. Ron Blair got me started. When my husband Rob and I got married back on June 6, 1992, many of you were there, he gave us a present, which turned out to be one of the most lasting and wonderful presents we got of all of them. He said, come over at the end, towards the end of the fall, in the early fall, and I'm going to give you perennials from my garden. And so we went, he gave us armloads and armloads, and I planted them, and it was a whole garden full. It must have been like 12, 15 different kinds of plants. They all grew. Ron is a good gardener. They all grew beautifully. And that was the foundation of the garden that we had at our house. And so I really appreciate his generosity in that way, and I recommend that anybody who needs cuttings stop by or give him a call in the fall, because he's got a huge garden, and he probably needs to get rid of some of his perennials. But anyway, he's a great gardener, and he really got us started. And it's been a lot of fun growing them over time. The other people that I really want to thank are our good friends David and Betsy Hinchman, because this book right here, before I think anybody here thought of it, one person thought of it, and that was David Hinchman. He just had that creative thought. Betsy is a fabulous gardener. She's one of the best. In fact, I think we should nominate her as president of the garden club that hasn't been formed yet. Anyway, she's a great gardener, and so there's all this chicken soup for the soul activity going on in town. He says to her, "Hey, why don't you do chicken soup for the gardener's soul?" She thought, good idea. She came to me. She said, "Can you help me get started on this and write the query letter and this and that?" And I said, "Yeah, but boy, I'd really love to help you with the book." And she said, "Sure, great," which was so wonderful. So we start working on it. Well, it just is a lot of library time and computer time. And after about 6 months, we still didn't have enough sample stories. And Betsy decided she wanted to work on other kinds of writing projects, and so she went off to do other kinds of projects, and that's when I got Pat Stone to be my partner instead. But I wanted to just honor them and thank them and tell you all how great they are, because they were so generous to have that great idea and share it with me and then all of us, so that it became a reality. And in light of that, what I'd like to read, to close, I'd like to read something which is about friendship, because here I am in Fairfield with all my beloved friends. And this is something that, I don't know, it's just always been one of my favorites. It's just so sweet. It's a prayer, really. It's by Reverend Max Coots. It's a prayer of thanksgiving. And it's called Garden Meditations. The quote that goes with it is, "Friendship is a sheltering tree." Isn't that nice? Samuel Coleridge. And so he says, "Let us give thanks for a bounty of people, for children who are our second planting. And though they grow like weeds, and the wind too soon blows them away, may they forgive us our cultivation and fondly remember where their roots are. Let us give thanks for generous friends with hearts and smiles as bright as their blossoms, for feisty friends as tart as apples, for continuous friends who, like scallions and cucumbers, keep reminding us that we've had them, for crotchety friends, sour as rhubarb and just as indestructible, for handsome friends who are gorgeous as eggplants and as elegant as a row of corn, and the others, as plain as potatoes and so good for you. For funny friends who are as silly as Brussels sprouts and as amusing as Jerusalem artichokes. And serious friends, as unpretentious as cabbages, as subtle as summer squash, as persistent as parsley, as delightful as dill, as endless as zucchini, and who, like parsnips, can be counted on to see you through the winter. For old friends, nodding like sunflowers in the evening time, and young friends coming on fast as radishes. For loving friends who wind around us like tendrils and hold us despite our blights, wilts, and witherings. And finally, for those friends now gone, like gardens past that have been harvested, but who fed us in their time that we might have life thereafter. For all these we give thanks." Isn't that sweet? Thank you. And I'd like to thank, a special thanks to a few people who are actually here right with us. Let me just get my little bouquet of flowers. As I say, some of the people I wanted to thank can't be here, but I do want to thank especially Ms. Carol Kline. Come on up! What color do you want?
Oh, I'd like this yellow one.
Okay.
Gorgeous. You had your hand on it. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy is an incredible editor. Has a great...
That's how I got started, helping Carol.
yeah, she has
Cat and dog lover soul.
She has a great feeling for the cadence of how stories should work, and she's been so helpful to me.
Oh.
I've acknowledged her in all of my books, so I really appreciate this. Thank you, Cindy.
Well, she trained me, really. Carol's the primo. You want a chicken soup story edited, you go to Carol. But she's, yeah, thank you. She was so supportive in so many ways. And also Sid and Eileen, come on down, get a flower. Because you've just like shared the strain, shared the difficulties. Choose your colors. White.
I would say that the experience for us has been, and still going on, is we felt very lucky to have the support in the community of
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a help.
Again,
everybody.
Carol Kline to the rescue.
Yeah.
And Cindy and
And Eleanor.
Eleanor was one of our manuscript readers, probably
Yeah.
everybody. And I think it's just been a great gift to have the opportunity to contribute that.
What book are you doing?
Oh, that's right. Well, Sid's actually my husband. He's co-authoring
Chicken Soup for the Veteran
Veteran
Soul.
Soul, coming out May
We just,
15th.
a few weeks ago, they made the decision to move it up by 3 months. Initially, it had been planned to be released on August 15th. Then somebody was wise enough to realize that if they got it out by May 15th, it would be out in time for Memorial Day, which obviously is a perfect tie-in. And then also, too, if you've been to the movies lately, you might have seen the previews of the movie Pearl Harbor. It's supposed to be the big summer blockbuster. They expect it to be as big as the movie Saving Private Ryan. So obviously it made good marketing sense to have a book about veterans out when the whole population is out seeing a movie about veterans. So, so it was our good fortune that they pushed it up by 3 months, but also what that meant was we had 3 months of work to do in 3 weeks. So,
And you're still walking.
yeah, and when we're done here, we're going back to work.
Yeah, really.
So
Good luck.
It's been fun.
Yeah,
Not
it's gonna be
complaining.
a mega
Yeah.
blockbuster.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome. Thank you. I have to thank Eleanor. She read our manuscript. Come take a rose. Eleanor is she has been behind the scenes support for every Chicken Soup for the Soul book, and she has such talent. Oh, yellow to match your sweater.
Yes, perfect.
She has such talent to offer, and
Thank you.
yes.
I actually had the great good fortune of working with Marcy Scheimoff and Jennifer Hawthorne on Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul, and that was the very first specialized chicken soup title. Before that, the books were just a first serving, second helping, third bowl, fourth, who knows what. And Marcy and Jennifer went to Jack Canfield and said, we think there should be a chicken soup for the woman's soul, because 80% of the people who buy chicken soup books are women, and we should do it. And he said, well, why should you do it? Well, because we're women. Because we want to and we can and we could, and so
They did.
invited me to participate with them because they were both at the time speakers and trainers and out of town a lot. So Marcy and Jennifer and I gave birth to that first Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul, and that was, I don't know, 5 years
96.
ago.
5 years, yeah.
5 years ago. And Carol got involved at that point, and now Fairfield is Chicken Soup City.
People say, what is it with Fairfield and the chicken soup books? They can't figure it out. Thank you, Eleanor. One thing that's kind of fun is, I don't know if you know, but the way we choose the stories, everything is like really a system. And you choose among yourselves the top 180 that you as a group like. And then you send those 180 out in a manuscript we send it out to 50 people because we do everything on a large scale. Usually it's like 40 people. Eleanor was one. I didn't read it. No, she couldn't read ours. She was busy with her others, with Mother's Soul. Anyway, Eleanor has been a reader of so many manuscripts. So many of them. So we were really fortunate to have her. But anyway, what we do is we take the grades. Every story gets graded. It sounds so mathematical, but every story is graded on a scale of 1 to 10. 10, it made you laugh, sigh, or cry. You've got to get that physiological response in order to get the 10. And if it made you really bawl, then it's like a 10 plus plus. Or really, you know, you couldn't stop laughing. I had one of those. So anyway, we average them, and that's pretty much what goes in the book. We go by that group consciousness of the large numbers of what people liked. So, so that's the system on that. And who else? I want to thank Rob, my husband. Come up, honey. He put up with me being crazy. What color do you want? Thank you, sweetie. He's been very patient through a year and a half of labor and pizza and everything not being attended to as well as it could be on the home front.
You know, this is the first time I've seen you speak publicly.
Oh, really?
I've seen her on stage. Maybe a lot of you guys have seen her on stage. It's the first time I've seen her speak. She's a good speaker.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, honey. Thank you.
We already have deficit spending, so.
Yes, the chicken soup book is an investment, I keep telling him.
But this might be interesting. It's interesting how nature works things out for us to kind of stretch and grow and, you know, stretch our boundaries. When I was in high school, I really hated English, and I had this teacher, English teacher, that I just couldn't stand. It, you know, it was so bad that I dropped out. I didn't take English my senior year. I was already accepted to college, so I didn't have to have it, you know. And so, you know, I have like all these bad memories, and you know, I got into college and I majored in physics, but I had to take these entrance exams, and I did really high, like 99 percentile in scientific knowledge, and in verbal ability it was like 5%. My advisor said, how were you able to read the science questions to get this score? Because you don't have any verbal ability. So I married an English teacher. It's one way to get it. Yeah, really. It's been,
I handle that department in the house.
I'm constantly being corrected. And
No. Actually, it's amazing. I would have thought that years ago, and then like we were dating, and we went to a party, and we were playing Scrabble to get together, and I thought, you know, with another couple, and I thought, oh, Rob may not do very well with Scrabble. He completely beat everybody, and like did way better than me. I think I came in last. He's got surprising talents, so. And he's been very patient through this long, hard season. Thank you, sweetie. Thank you. So, I have to give this to Cindy just because during these last few months she's been so helpful to me. She's been like my buddy through a lot of these times. And I have to also thank my friends who have been patiently waiting to ever see me again, because I've just like dropped out of life, sort of. But I'm coming back now that I'm done. So I think if you don't have any questions, I think that we're like done, and anybody who wants to have a book signed, I'm happy to sign them. And, and cookies, we've got, what do we have? We've got various kinds of tea and coffee, and we've got lemon cookies and other kinds of fruit and sugar cookies. So thanks all for coming so much, and enjoy the spring. Oh, wait, I've got things for you. This is really fun. I think that some of the marketing materials for our book are just the best. Make sure before you go, actually let's just pass them around. We've got these wonderful bookmarks. Aren't these pretty? We'll just sort of pass them around. And we've got these wonderful postcards. We need one more. You have a postcard. Just pass them around as best you can. Okay. And then there's also this thing that we just came out with, which I really love. We just had this idea, and it's being typeset right now, but it's called A Dozen Ways You Can Make the World More Beautiful, as inspired by Chicken Soup for the Gardener's Soul. And so there are 12 different things you can do. I'll read the first one. Each one of them is tied into a story from the book. So the first one is, number 1, donate flowers to your local hospital's maternity ward or other patient care area. Ask the staff to make sure the flowers are given to someone who hasn't received any, someone who needs a little boost, just like in our story, A Gift of Grace. So there's all kinds of 12 ideas like that that are really fun. So have one of these. And thanks again for coming. It was really fun having you. Hi, sweetie. Thank you Oh, thanks.
Boy, you should not have made me cry.
Oh, I'm so glad you cried. I have my two best criers right in the front.
You were wonderful.
Oh, thanks, Diane.
Your
Thank you so
your
much for
stories,
doing this.
everything.
Oh, I'm glad.
So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.